Hi, my name is Alexia Idoura. I'll be presenting on the paper Smart Home Privacy Policies Demystified, a study of availability, content, and coverage. First, I'd like to acknowledge the authors of the paper, Sunil Manandhar, Kaushal Kafle, and Adwait Nadkarni from William & Mary, Benjamin Andow from Google, and Kapil Singh from IBM. This paper was presented at the Usenix Security Symposium in August of 2022. I've included the link here for you. As an abstract, smart home devices transmit usage information to vendors or third parties. Consumers need to be able to weigh the benefits of smart home devices against the risks of the loss of that privacy. Privacy policies are the vehicle that is expected to provide that information so consumers can do just that. The focus of this research was around the current state of smart home privacy policies, specifically availability, how hard is it for consumers to obtain the policies, content, how do the policies describe the collection and sharing of device data, and coverage, how accurate are those descriptions. 17 findings were revealed, demonstrating gaps in existing privacy policies impacting millions of users. Not all those findings were negative. Also identified challenges and opportunities for automated analysis. Users deserve to be informed. Privacy concerns are a hindrance in the adoption of smart home devices. This is well founded as operational data may contain highly private evidence of users' activities in their personal environment. For example, door locks can expose users' schedules. A legally binding privacy policy performs this function. Prior work used state-of-the-art automated analysis tools to analyze policies, for example, around mobile and web. Due to the detailed and understudied nature of smart homes, automated analysis is not feasible right now. Policies are not easily available. Analysis would be difficult without insight into the content itself. Coverage across all types of devices would be needed. Initial investigation revealed that it would not be trivial to directly analyze device policies with existing tools. Insights that would enable automated analysis tools in the future would be valuable. This scale, the first large-scale evaluation of smart home device privacy policies, made the following contributions. Large-scale study of vendor device policies along availability, content, and coverage. Systematic study, semi-automated. Insights and data sets can be used to develop automated methods. 17 findings disclosing gaps in the current policies, and the need for contextualization identified and a way to get there. So let's talk about the motivation behind the research. There's a great quote from the director of IoT at LexisNexis that said, "We're moving from having a snapshot in time to an ongoing assessment of what's happening in the home." So because of profiling like this, informed consent is important. Policies are what make that possible. Due to the lack of previous study, automatic analysis was not possible, as we mentioned. There are really two motivations behind this research. So one is the content in the policy itself. So the availability, content, and coverage to identify where users are not able to make informed consent decisions. And then also around the actual analysis, so laying the groundwork for automated analysis of smart home device privacy policies in the future. With both of those in mind, the research questions were developed, and they were: question 1, how difficult is it for consumers to obtain privacy policies that apply to their smart home devices? Question 2, how precisely is the collection and sharing of device data described in smart home product privacy policies? And question 3, how comprehensive are smart home product privacy policies in describing the collection and sharing of device data? Let's take a look at an overview of the study. So the details of the methodology for each research question, I'm going to discuss those in the sections about those research questions. Additionally, a set of impact metrics were identified to assess the impact of the findings based on the popularity of the affected vendors. So 4 statistics were used primarily here. Amazon ratings, Amazon bestseller designation, Amazon's Choice badge, and Google Play install count. So these metrics provide insights based on various factors: price, quality, sales performance, availability, and usage, with the thought being that the higher these statistics, the more likely users are to purchase and use those devices. The metrics, weaknesses in these metrics are discussed, and I'm going to discuss those later on globally after we discuss each of the three questions. Note that the metrics were used to assess popularity after the conclusion of the study, so as not to impact vendor selection. These metrics were collected automatically, but one of the authors did validate each result manually. Not all vendors are represented on these two platforms, but they are complementary and ensure coverage of about 87% of vendors. So let's dig into the first question around availability. How available are these device-specific privacy policies to users? So really there were two key tasks around determining this. One was to identify the representative set of smart home vendors, and the other was to then locate the device privacy policies for those vendors. So in identifying that representative set, the assumption was made that the demand for automation and interoperability is a primary driver for this market. So the cumulative list of devices integrated into popular platforms represents the devices that users are most likely to use. So based on that, the researchers compiled a list of smart home device vendors from 7 popular automation frameworks, including Alexa, Google Assistant, If This Then That, SmartThings, Apple HomeKit, OpenHab, and Home Assistant. The researchers normalized those lists and condensed the remaining names into individual brands. So for example, if a brand had multiple devices, they would normalize down to the brand. The researchers Googled the brands and scraped the top 10 results. They resolved those URLs to the vendors by matching domain and vendor names. And then they manually confirmed the matches and filtered out website content that was from non-smart home vendors. From that resulting list, the researchers searched for vendor resources in an order that a user planning to buy was likely to follow. First, looking at the vendor website. Second, doing a web search. Third, looking on the mobile app store. And then fourth, if no policy had been found in the previous steps, registering, if it was a short process, to see if the policy dialog box was shown as part of that. So for every policy found, they tested whether the policy applied to devices by extracting the preamble and the section on data collection, and checked for references to products or devices, either explicit or implicit. The search ended once device privacy policy was found or all the resources were examined. There were 5 findings in this phase of the research. Finding number 1, no policy. About 10.5% of vendors do not provide privacy policies even for websites. The impact metrics show users are very likely to buy devices from these vendors. This is a potential violation of CCPA if certain additional criteria are satisfied, such as revenue. The second finding was that their 43.52% do not have policies specific to smart home products. They may only cover the website, mobile app, or account-related data. So for example, there's a company that produces a smoke alarm that contains a microphone, but they do not have a privacy policy specific to that device. Several are high-impact vendors. These are also potential violations of CCPA and GDPR. Finding number 3, device policy not found on the website. So only 64.38% of vendors that released a device privacy policy put it on the website. Several are high-impact vendors. The implication here is that automated collection tools would fail to find over 35% of the policies. Finding number 4, device policy is hard to get. So in 14.38% of the cases, the policy could only be viewed by running the vendor's app. These vendors are high impact. Often it took a great deal of effort to locate the policy. So, in fact, this diagram that I have included on this slide illustrates one of the examples given for Honeywell. This was actually the process that the researchers had to go through to get to the privacy policy. So there was a third-party vendor that licensed the brand name. They searched. They finally found it after registering and opening the app. There was a link at the bottom of the page, and then it downloaded a Word document that covered the sensor data. Most users in the process of buying devices are not going to go through that extensive effort. Finding number 5, website privacy policies are not easily available. So 26.84% of vendors do not make website privacy policies easily available. Several are high-impact vendors, and again, this is a potential violation of CCPA. Around research question number 2, around the content itself, the content of the policies. Here, there were really 2 phases to this research, of this methodology. So one was to identify labels that could be applied to these types of policies. And then the second part would be to actually take those labels and apply them to the policies. So in identifying the policies, first, the team explored the use of labels for other domains, such as mobile, but those were not sufficient. They didn't include the physical privacy context, such as using a device inside versus outside. Privacy regulations also were not sufficiently granular. They developed 2 types of labels based on knowledge of regulations, such as CCPA and GDPR and so on, also based on prior work on privacy policies and domain-specific enhancements. These labels, the 2 types, were document labels and content labels, and Table 3, taken from the paper, has a list of those. The document labels are properties of the entire policy, whereas content labels are more specific. They're the property of specific text fragments. The researchers then went and labeled the policies. So they segmented the policies when possible into up to 11 sections, and they applied the labels. To be systematic and to make this reproducible, 2 authors independently labeled the policies. The average Cohen's Kappa score of 0.95 showed high agreement on the labels. On the ones where there was a difference, they were able to resolve those through discussions. From there, they then analyzed the results. This section yielded 6 results, actually 7. Finding number 6, broad terms. So 26.05% of policies use generic terms not specific to device type or device data. Again, potential violation of CCPA. Finding number 7, device data. 70.42% mentioned some device data, specifically around collection. Finding number 8, incorrectly reasoned. So 69.01% of policies may be incorrectly interpreted by privacy policy analysis tools due to lack of context and standards. There's a case study of PolicyLint later in this paper that we'll talk about. Finding number 9, no collect. So 8 vendors state that they don't collect any information. It's possible, but unlikely. It could indicate a need to make sure terminology is being used consistently. For example, the term collection. This is also a potential violation of CCPA. Finding number 10, share PII. So 65.49% of device privacy policies discuss sharing data generically as PII or personal data without referencing device data specifically. This is also a potential violation of CCPA. Finding number 11, share device data. So 24.64% of policies discuss device data specifically, but don't share or don't specify with whom the data is shared. Of these, 50% discuss data at the attribute level, 34.28% explicitly discuss the destination of the data. Most of these vendors are highly popular. And then finding number 12, no share. Only 2.1% of vendors do not discuss sharing data, which may be true or just poorly written policy. Only 3.87% state that they do not share data either with third parties or for marketing and promotional purposes. And now let's talk about research question number 3. So this is about coverage of the policies. And the methodology, ideally, you would compare actual data transmission data to vendor claims, but that would be prohibitively costly. So instead, the researchers used approximations of coverage by constructing a vendor device type map. Vendor's policy is considered complete if it describes data related to all the devices they sell. This identifies missing devices and missing attributes. So the map was constructed in 2 steps. One, by manually obtaining lists of device types for each vendor from their websites, and then mapping each device type to attributes using mappings provided by the Open Connectivity Foundation, standard, and prior work. For each policy, the team obtained every device type sold by that vendor from the map, and for each device checked for the minimal attributes in the privacy policy. If all included, considered complete, even if imprecise, this allowed for conservative estimate of policies that have incomplete coverage. And here we had 4 additional findings. Finding number 13, incomplete coverage. 25% of policies that discuss device data are incomplete. In other words, they only cover a subset of the devices. Finding number 14, privacy implication. Most vendors don't differentiate their privacy policies for devices that produce similar data, but have different privacy implications. So, for example, they may identify that video is shared. However, the privacy implications for video for a doorbell, for example, would be much different than video for a baby monitor. Finding number 15, irrelevant data. Several vendors provide statements with unrelated attributes. For example, in a policy for a smart fan, they had included information about collecting the BMI, the body mass index, from a fitness tracker. It's possible that vendors were in the process of updating policies. This would make it not only difficult for the users to understand, but also produce false positives for automated analysis. Finding number 16, broad statements. In several cases, policies were considered to be making broad statements, but actually were precise given the actual devices the vendor sold. For example, a vendor that sold only light bulbs had broad statements, but since they only sold the one device, it was actually specific to that device. Enabling policy analysis frameworks for the smart home. So, key challenges for enabling end-to-end automated analysis of smart home device privacy policies. One is acquiring and identifying smart home device policies. They're not currently easy to find or get. So again, the researchers had to do quite a bit of manual work here to get that. Accurately analyzing device data. Labels provide context. The researchers have created the first labeled data set for smart home specific policies. And then using additional context, such as vendor device relationships from external sources, does enhance accuracy and precision. This is the case study I mentioned earlier about policy lint, and from this we get finding number 17. So the researchers took a look at state-of-the-art open source privacy policy analyzer, Policy Lint, which is also used in PoliCheck. They tested the performance on smart home device privacy policies under 2 conditions. So using Policy Lint's NER model as is, and then augmenting the model with the smart home context, training it with 500 annotated policy statements from device policies using the Policy Lint annotation methodology, and then testing it with 100 more policy statements. Use the Spacey model as a baseline, and created this new model specific to smart homes, and then compared the 3 models. So the Policy Lint model performed better than the baseline, and the contextualized smart home policy performed better yet. So finding number 17 is around contextualization. So smart home is a distinct domain for policy analysis. Contextualized models work better. So here they had higher precision, higher recall, and a higher F1 score compared to the PolicyLint model. 506 vendors were informed of these findings. The team received 113 responses. The majority were automated replies acknowledging receipt. 6 replies stated that the vendors were in the process of addressing the issues. 9 directed the researchers to updated policies. 15 clarified their data handling practices. 11 pointed researchers to their policies with no changes. None of the 43 vendors that had no privacy policy at all responded. There was some interesting discussion as a result. So there are opportunities to improve smart home device privacy policies. Standardized distribution of policies can lessen the burden on the user to find them, improving the likelihood that users will make decisions based on informed consent. Precise and complete policies will improve transparency. Standardization of policies will allow for automated tools to be developed, which will save both vendors and users cost and effort by enforcing best practices. And enforcement will bring into line what vendors claim and what they do. I mentioned earlier that I would describe some of the threats to validity described in the paper. So one, manual effort. Manual effort is prone to error, inconsistency, a lack of reproducibility. So the researchers did have manual components to this study. Steps were taken to mitigate this by using 2 coders for the labeling, confirming every finding manually, and describing the methodology in great detail so it could be reproduced. Privacy disclosures after purchase. So vendors may provide privacy policies in the box, but they were not considered because at that point it would be too late for informed consent during the purchase process. Google Play. For availability, only Android apps were considered, as Google Play has the largest market share, and it would be unlikely for an iOS app to have a policy but not the corresponding Android app. And then impact metrics. Amazon badges and ratings can be subject to seller manipulation. To mitigate this, multiple metrics were used to approximate the popularity of a vendor. Related work. The initial plan was to leverage previous work on privacy policies for mobile and web. However, smart home device privacy policies were different enough to be treated as a new domain. There were still 2 areas of work that were particularly relevant to this study. Privacy policy analysis, so prior work did look at readability and comprehension as well as availability of policies for mobile apps. The policies were readily available as part of the user's app usage workflow, unlike the policies for smart home devices. And smart home privacy analysis. This really is the first large-scale study of smart home device privacy policies. However, there has been work prior on the behavior of these devices, such as analysis of network traffic to understand the exfiltration of sensitive data via devices. To conclude, users' access to information that they need to make informed consent decisions when purchasing smart home devices is hampered. Smart home device privacy policies inform consumers how vendors use their device data. The data-driven study of 596 privacy policies covered 2,442 devices, studied availability, content, and coverage of devices in policies. The findings show that users' access to precise and clear policies is hampered by a lack of clear standards for making policies available to users, specific enough to be meaningful and contextualized. The labeled data and insights from this work will help make automated policy analysis of smart home device policies possible in the future and will improve user access to relevant information about how their data will be collected, used, and shared. Thank you very much.